So I'll start by immediately calling my participants. So I would like to ask for Paola Pisiano, that is the Deputy Mayor for Innovation, Smart City, Demographic and Statistical Services from the City of Torino, Michael Sherwood, the Director of Technology and Innovation from Las Vegas, Rikesh Shah, Head of Commercial Innovation from Transport for London, and Jim Ray, Senior Advisor to the Secretary from the United States Department of Transportation. So we have lights there. Great, so thank you very much for coming. It's like we have crowds, so it's nice. Thank you for staying. And it's really, first of all, it's an open discussion, so feel free to argue with each other and not to agree on everything. I'm not sure about the times we have, but if we'll have some time left, maybe we'll take one question from the audience. I think it's a difficult topic. I mean, this discussion is not going to be about technology. Talking about technology, I'm not an engineer. I didn't study a master in science or in computers. But technology is quite easy because you can show some graphs, you can think about it, easy to imagine it. This panel is more about perception, is about planning cities, and how, what will be the relationship between land uses in cities and the revolution in smart transportation. So I think it's a bit less easier than talking about technology itself. Before we will deep dive into our panel, I would like to invite Paola to introduce the Torino City Lab. So please.
Thank you.
And then we will continue.
I don't know if I can use this. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to Smart Mobility Summit to invite the city of Torino here. We are very happy to be here today and to visit your beautiful city. For us, it was the first time, so congratulations for this beautiful city. So before talking about mobility, I would like to spend 2 minutes talk about our policy around innovation and to show you a little video on it. So let me see if I'm able to start with the video. There is also the...
You do it? Okay, great. They do it.
Okay, thank you.
Can you put the video in the center of the screen?
This is innovation.
This is like
exactly.
a voice recognition. Now I'll tell the screen to...
So, thank you. We decided as a city to lead innovation in our country, and we created this policy around innovation to start innovation and to attract organization in our city, and then to share all the results of our innovation in all our countries. So for doing this, we need to attract innovative organization. Okay, we need to attract innovative organization that test in our city their innovation to show the validity of their innovation and what the city are doing in this moment, are supporting this testing of innovation, helping organization and innovator to do this in a really easy environment. in an environment where the bureaucracy is low and we can have all the authorization in order to test innovation. Imagine to test innovation around drone. The city needs authorization for the flying of the drone, or to test autonomous car in our city. So we collect authorization, we simplify the bureaucracy, and we give all the information and all the data to the organization that want to come in our city and testing innovation. So if the innovation is good, if it has a good impact, a social impact in our society, and in our city, the rule of our city has to be the rule of share this innovation and scale the innovation in all our country and in all Europe. For this reason, we create a lot of partnership with other different cities in order to scale the innovation that start and be tested in our city and then goes in all the country. Of course, I think that also in this panel we will talk about infrastructure and the importance of this infrastructure and scaling also infrastructure in a country. So the city has a new role, not only an habilitator of testing innovation, but a partner that share with organization the risk of innovation and the goal of innovation, of course. One practical case that we start in our city is the project Smart Road, that is a project around autonomous vehicle. We start last February with a decree of the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure that allowed all the city to test the autonomous vehicle inside the city. So we create a partnership between different actors. We define our use cases. We define a circuit inside our city. We create an agreement with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure in order to be observed and to share our results in all our country. We create partnership with another city, Modena, in Italy, and then we will start the test in November. Actually, we have already started the test last weekend, so we are in the perfect timeline. This is our main partner in this project. As you see, we need, of course, the conversion of different industry. We have automotive, telecommunication, university, and insurance, and SME association. But this is an open partnership between actors and subjects, so we are open to accept other partners in this testing, and we start also to speak with other organizations here in Tel Aviv, like Mobileye. And this is our circuit in our city, as is 35 kilometers of circuit, and you can see the different cases that we are defining in order to test it. And that's it. We want to test innovation, to drive innovation, to give the opportunity to our citizens to test innovation, and maybe tomorrow also to create innovation. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll come to visit you sometime in the future. Of course.
You have to.
Yeah. So I'll talk fast because the time is running out. This is like expensive asset. So the main interest here in this panel is to understand the relationship between the smart transportation revolution, in which I assume most of us think that is going to happen, and land uses and planning in cities. I myself live like 500 meters from here. My building is 50 years old, ugly. You can see all the cables like outside, not smart. The neighborhood is 70 years old. So we can understand that planning takes a lot of time, and technology changes today faster than ever. So we need to understand if we can plan neighborhoods and buildings better for making the smart transportation revolution a benefit to ourselves. And we can think what will happen when the marginal cost of per mile will reduce, what will happen to cities. We see even today the conflicts between cities and the revolution. So this is the essence, and I would like to start with the first questions. So first of all, if you already started your organization or the city or the government you represent, if you already started planning or thinking about this subject in concrete means, and who wants to be first, please?
So I think the first thing for me is, how do you define smart? We all have different definitions of smart. I mean, my definition is, there's lots of emerging technology, there's lots of new data. How can it support our city's goals, our city's outcomes? And if it's positive, for me, that's a good success from a smart point of view. I think the other thing to touch on is things have changed. So when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, when it came to mobility, it was quite straightforward. My parents had a car, I would use a bus, I would use a tube, I would own a bike, or I would call up a minicab service. Well, things are very different now. We just look around in Tel Aviv, and the amount of mobility options you've got, you don't even need to necessarily own a car. I think the other thing politically is mobility has moved now from just moving people from A to B to much more. So it supports the health agenda, it supports the housing agenda, the economic growth agenda, the digital and science agenda. And transport has a big role to play. So when it comes to London, our mayor is very much focusing on how can transport support the city goals beyond just moving people around. I think going back to new technologies, it's important the city starts with the problem statement and the outcome, and have a very strongly assess what's out there in the marketplace, and engage with the market early. And by engaging early, we can then develop some trials in a controlled manner. And then we can start thinking about scaling. So touching on some of the Torino examples there. But by doing a trial in a controlled manner, you can develop a position. And it's really hard to change regulation in any country. So you really want to be informed. So as a city authority, we want to influence the government and the central government on legislation. I think in the space of mobility, Transport for London is responsible for 27 million journeys every day. So it's very important that we can't afford to go wrong. So anything that we're testing, the right controls need to be in place. And as a result, we can bring the right smart initiatives in. But saying that, in London, we've had driverless technology when it comes to the DLR for 25 years. I mean, that was smart. So smart, a new word. We've had 36 trains on one of the major trains every hour going each way. So again, that's as good as Tokyo or any other transit authority. When it comes to open data, we release all of our data. So as a result, there's 700 plus apps powered by TfL data. That's created 700 new businesses. And it doesn't matter on the size of the business, whether it's a large player or a small player. In fact, there's one app developer that has the 25% of the bus market share in London. It's one developer and one business development person. And finally, ticketing. Again, how can we use smart ticketing to help people move around? So I think going forward, in summary, it's about really understanding where the city is going, really understanding what we are delivering and how technology could play a role. And then think about the public-private contribution. What is the private organisation bringing in? Because the public authority can't do it all. And as I say, engage early, assess the position, and then think about the delivery strategy. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
So just a couple of things. Pretty good, right?
Now you'll have to applaud all of us, because then we'll feel, it's better. And
please don't. First off, I want to say thank you very much for having me here. It was a tremendous honor to go to the dinner last night with the Prime Minister. I want you all to know that he's a personal hero of mine, and I know a dear friend of our country. So thank you for having me here today. The question that you ask. Thanks. In all sincerity, I look up to him quite a bit. He's a true hero and inspirational figure. So I wanted to come to this conference not to meet the Prime Minister, although that was very nice to see him, but I wanted to come because over the last few years, I've had the opportunity to see some amazing Israeli technology come and present itself to the shores of America, and I desperately wanted to see what was coming next. And there was no better place than this venue to do just that. So thank you for the opportunity. On the question that you ask, I want to just take a moment and explain kind of the American system of government. So I work for the Department of Transportation in Washington, D.C. We're the federal entity. For any of those who saw the earlier panel with Tina Quigley, she mentioned that she had to comply with certain federal requirements. Those come from our institution. But our job is we are their regulator, we are their funder, we are their banker as it relates to loan programs. We facilitate conversations on next generation technologies. We keep best practices and help cross-pollinate. We do lots of things, but we don't own the underlying assets or systems. That belongs to our state and local partners, and you'll hear from Michael here in a minute, who is one of those. So it's a different role. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a function in planning. And I want to talk through just a few of the things that we're doing, because you asked, what are we doing today? So planning can certainly mean planning in the context that you mentioned for planning urban environments and roadways, transportation facilities, and the like. I would tell you that our planning regs at the federal level, which then cascade down to requirements for our state and locals, is really rooted in a 1980s model. It's really built to help our partners and guide our partners through planning for a singular type of product. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not looking at air quality across the host of them and the things like that. Of course we are, but it's meant to deploy a light rail system, a roadway, a bridge, and those types of things. And it's not suited to be a very nimble or dynamic, flexible environment that will help us onboard these next generation technologies and solutions that we're beginning to see. And I'm looking for our next major piece of legislation and looking at possibly rewriting those planning requirements so that we can afford ourselves the opportunity to be flexible and nimble and think outside the box in more meaningful ways. So that's one, but it also means planning from a regulatory standpoint. So for instance, this is not necessarily the type of mobility that we're talking about, but much to our surprise, I think we now control 80+% of the world's commercial space launches. People are building satellites in other countries and they're sending them to the United States. We have a policy objective to be doing a launch a week in not the too distant future. And so, but we don't have a regulatory regime to suit that. We are doing an environmental analysis on every single launch right now, even though they are the exact same launch week after week after week. And so we need a different regulatory regime that will allow that business to move forward and flourish, and some days do amazing things for us as citizens of the world. But it's not just that. The autonomous vehicle space, and I heard the Prime Minister speak yesterday and talk about we will create the regulatory regime to permit that. We will as well. We're working very hard. We just announced Autonomous Vehicles 3.0 guidance. We don't want to over-regulate too quickly because we know that there's a ton of innovation still happening. But those types of planning activities are still very much in the process as well. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is from the federal government's perspective, you really have to ask yourself, what is the function of the government? And in our context, I know it's neither right nor wrong, but we've culturally taken the view that it's our job to correct for market inefficiencies, correct for market failures, and not to overregulate with the implications that they may bring with it. And so we've taken that job very seriously, and we frankly try to trust our local partners and the asset owners themselves to both identify the problems that they have and to implement solutions that are acceptable to their communities. And it's our job to make them successful and do it with all the tools and abilities that we have. So it's a different view than I think just saying, well, we're going to automatically from the federal level suggest that the number of parking spaces per new apartment building should be X and there should be scooter lanes everywhere. You won't see us do that, but we see that really as a local function. So thank you.
So it's great. We are moving to the local function, and I'm trying to, again, stressing the issue if your city is already planning or even, planning for the drawer, like trying to understand what will be the implications and how we will deal with that.
So first, let me thank you for being here today. This is a beautiful country with great people, and I've been so blessed to be here and learn so much in such a short time. And then following these two, very difficult act now for me at the local level. The local level is difficult. We do planning, but we look to the higher levels. You had Tina Quigley. That's another level above us where we partner. Another level at the federal level. We don't have scooters in Las Vegas. So there's been an effort to not have that until there's more information, more data. The citizenry hasn't asked for scooters to be prevalent. There was a time in Las Vegas when there was no Uber and Lyft for a while, so ride sharing was not allowed. That has since changed. So a lot of what we try to do from the city level is a real basic function. I believe in simplicity, but it's really about building community to make life better for everyone in the community. So it's looking at what kind of decisions can we make to simplify transit, to simplify healthcare, without getting in the way of the bodies, the governing bodies that oversee those. How do we make that connection? So I really don't look at the term smart city as a term. I look at connection. How do we make a connection? Because Las Vegas is no smarter than New York. I'd like to think we are, but I know that we're probably not. So we're good at risk. We're good at understanding gambling and money and so forth. And please come. And we'll show you how good we are with risk. But the main point is how do we connect all walks of life to transportation? Sometimes that does mean we look at, like our parking garages as an example. I'll leave this as our last example. We used to build the ramps in the center of the parking garage. So those 4 to 5, 7-foot structures, the ramps would always be in the center. What we've learned over time and in our future plans, we put the ramps on the outside of the parking structure now. That way, if we have, which we believe we will in the next 5 to 7 years, a deduction in the number of cars that need to use a parking structure, we can repurpose those first 2 or 3 floors into other uses, residential, office, and so forth, while still keeping some parking structure. By having the ramp on the outside, we can pull that down. And now we have a building that we could use for other purposes. So that's kind of when we think about planning. It's what can we do today that will help through the future, and how will those changes connect people to the services they need? Thank you.
Okay, here we are again. So in Torino, we start from one assumption, that is life is one. So we don't have to waste our time in the traffic. And we know that if we create a smart city, an intelligent city, we can save 60 hours for a citizen to spend doing whatever they want, but not be in the middle of the traffic or spend money for paying the parking or parking, for example. So starting from this point, we create a list of actions that we are doing in our city in order to simplify the mobility of our city. And of course, always looking about the environment and the impact of the mobility inside the environment, and also the social impact, because in Torino and in Europe, we have an older population that will become even more older for the 2020 and 50. That is the terrible data you will see in all the article that 2050 everything will change and will become worse. So. For this reason, we start a list of activity. The first thing is car sharing, bike sharing, and carpooling, motor sharing, in order to create this habit inside our citizens to use in sharing the car. So to start thinking about a service and not about the goods that is the car. The second thing is redesign the mobility on the top of the need of our citizen. So we study how our citizens move in our city using data. We collect this data and we start design the line of the public transportation using this data. For example, we're planning the second line of the tube using collecting data of our citizens and use this data. The third thing that we are doing is involve the citizen in the change. So ask them what they would like to have from public transportation. One easy thing is ask them where they want to find the station for the car sharing or the recharge station for the electric vehicle. And we use a platform to collect the opinion of our citizens. Then we use their suggestion to create our innovative mobility. We always have a look to the social impact of mobility, so to understand the accessibility of our mobility and to allow the people that live in the peripheral area of our city to get public transportation. This is an important issue for our city, give the possibility to the citizen to reach the center of the city. And also the economical sustainability, so give the opportunity to everybody to get a bus or a public transportation. Finally, give the opportunity to our citizens to test the innovation of a new solution in the mobility, like autonomous vehicle. So we try to attract, as I told you before, innovation in the autonomous mobility, autonomous van that will come in January in our city. And we try to push the citizen to use this new mobility and to give us the feedback in order to understand if it's useful for our city.
So
That's
I think
it.
it's...
May I just want to compliment you, because I think far too often people don't ask what the customer wants. And the fact that you've taken the initiative to actually solicit their input and feedback into what they want is a tremendous step forward. I think oftentimes we make certain assumptions about what is good or what they may need, but we don't ask them. And the fact that you've done that, I think, is a tremendous step forward, because customer expectations, particularly around public transport, have changed dramatically in a very, very short period of time. I think customer expectations remain very, very static in what they want from their system or what they expect from their system from, say, 1960 all the way to the early 2000s. And it's only very recently, with this mobility revolution, that their expectations have really shifted. And what they're expecting is something very different than what it was just a few short years ago. So compliments to you and Turin.
So we don't have much time. I'll be a bit more aggressive, and I'll try to ask you harder questions. So I'm going to combine the two last questions, and we'll do it quite fast. But first of all, even today we already see many conflicts between cities, pedestrians, other means of transportation. I mean, in the past, the sidewalk was controlled by the pedestrians or owned by the pedestrians. Today in Israel, you need to go with an umbrella and to push scooters and other means of transportation. So this is one conflict that we have. And again, we heard before that shared mobility is great and shared scooters, shared dockless bikes is nice. So first, what do you think? How should we interfere with these conflicts? And I think, again, this is a conflict that we have today, but in the future, maybe it will be easier or cheaper to the operator just to continue driving its autonomous shared car that night, rather they take it to the suburb, because the energy cost will be low and we will have endless amount of cars. So this is the first question, quite fast. Second, again, in Israel, I think the government pushed the citizens to use cars, private cars. I mean, I have a parking place, so I can use it. So, eventually, do you think, should we regulate? Should we try to educate the market which mean of transportation to use? We'll start in the same order, please.
Okay, so starting with the second question first. I think there has to be a long-term vision. And quite often, when it comes to political administrations, they focus on a 4-year vision, maybe a 6-year vision. So it's important you have a 20, 30-year set of goals. Now, in London, we've got a target of 80% of trips in London will be made by public transport, walking or cycling in 2041. So that's a shift from 64% now. So it's about 5 million journeys every day.
Amazing.
Let's see if we achieve it, but that's the target. Yep. Secondly, we've set a clear target around zero carbon by 2041. And on our own fleet, it will be earlier, by 2030. And thirdly, we have about 134 deaths every year as a result of road incidents. We want to get that to zero by 2050. So the mayor set a clear vision. I think what's interesting now in terms of trends is, in London, car driving license ownership is reducing. So as a result, you can make a trend there that actually car ownership may also reduce. And what things can we do and should we be doing? Firstly, we've got a political mandate to say actually there's a hierarchy now of modes, and per individual car ownership is probably slightly lower because of lots of reasons. One being it's a shared space, the population's rising, and for the city to function, we need to think more radically. But we need to provide good alternatives. If the good alternatives aren't there, you haven't got an option then, or good enough options. So how do you invest in the right modes of transport is important. So we've started to invest in segregated cycle superhighways. Secondly, transport planning is really important, and that needs to be data-led. Where do you invest the transport infrastructure? Thirdly, education is also important. How do you engage with your customer? And I'm glad you say customer, not passenger, because in the mobility space, we quite often say passenger. Actually, customers want to get from A to B as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, and also they want your city to be innovative. Thirdly, you have policy levers. So there is a carrot and stick, and you can apply policy levers. So in London, we have the congestion charge. We're about to introduce a new charge, which is if the vehicle is very old, you have to pay a premium for it to use it. But finally, you need leadership, and that's the ecosystem, whether it's your local municipalities, the corporates, the startups. You need to be having this debate to say, actually, what does the future look like, and how do we deliver it together?
Good. So I'll handle them in order. One, the conflict, I think I could answer it several ways. So let's take scooters as an example. We're very young in our experience with scooters. Someone told me the other day that I think that in Tel Aviv, those are selling at about 15,000 personal scooters a year. That's a staggering number coming from America, which prior to about 18 months ago, these were things children used, but not nearly as fast or seemingly dangerous. But having almost been run over multiple times on Tel Aviv streets by them. But, I would also say on conflict, I mean, it's interesting the way scooters are being rolled out in the United States. So rather than calling and being courteous and polite and asking a municipality, we intend to come to your town and set up our business and become a part of your mobility and your economy. How can we interface with you? Instead of doing that, the companies that are doing that tend to just show up and drop them all off at 6 a.m. And then, obviously everybody is very surprised that morning when they wake up and there's this brand new solution in town, and without very much knowledge about how to use it safely. So people aren't wearing bike helmets and they're on sidewalks, and no one knows how to use this. And I think that's a source of great tension. It's a source of conflict. And I know it was mentioned earlier that some cities enthusiastically embrace it and some cities, stick their head in the sand. I would characterize it very differently. I think anytime you surprise someone, if you turn around the corner and surprise someone coming out of the shower, they're going to react very differently. And it might not be a fully thought out conversation. So now the reason they're doing that is because they don't want the month-long or multi-month-long bureaucratic response that may come out of it. But I think there's got to be a better way. So to manage that type of conflict, I think, is one. The other is the conflict, which is the safety conflict, which I think is what you were alluding to. As we have all of these different vehicles traversing the same or similar routes, how do we safely do that? And again, I think as these mobility solutions come on board, we undoubtedly will have to insert into the planning process a thoughtful process on how to do that. Does that mean that they become segregated vehicles? I noticed here in Tel Aviv, there's many streets where you have segregated routes in the middle for bikes that scooters are now using and the like. I mean, I think we'll have to manage the conflict as we figure out which solutions will be here to stay and which ones may just be a passing fad. To the second one, which is should we regulate? This is one where I believe, and I think culturally we as Americans tend to believe that our citizens will make very intelligent, very smart decisions about their time and their money if they are armed with the right information. And if we provide them with information, then I think they will do the right thing. Oftentimes, we don't have good information in terms of if I want to go from here to the airport, how far am I away from a light rail station? How long will that trip take? What does the bus take? What does an Uber take? What will a taxi be like? And we don't have that information at our fingertips, but frankly, with the phones that we all carry, very soon and very shortly we should. And I know there's some companies here in this room or outside that are working on those types of solutions. And I think both from a time standpoint and a price standpoint, people will make smart decisions if we arm them with the right information. And I'll just give you one quick example. 10 years ago when I was working in the administration before, we did a quick study that showed that approximately 40% of the people on our interstates in our urban areas during both the AM and the PM peaks were not making a work-related trip. Now, that might mean that it was a retired couple who happened to like to go to the doctor early in the morning, or you're picking up your dry cleaning in the evening, or you're picking up your child from soccer practice, all perfectly appropriate and noble trips. But why are they using it at the worst possible time of the day? And it's because we're not giving people information or signals that, on how best to use it. And at least in that context, I think now the technology is going to provide better solutions. But at the time, congestion charging and variably priced toll roads sent those queues and broke that log jam of congestion in meaningful ways. Again, providing people with information, associating an actual price associated with that trip, and people are making better decisions about their use of the capacity. So, thank you.
Okay, so we must 2.5 minutes each, and from what I've heard, maybe we're going to tax cars by time and space from your opinions, but who knows? Please.
So I'll go quickly. I believe a lot has to do with education and dialogue and communication. And at a local level, that's still not happening at a level enough to educate the population on all the different types of options they have with transit. One interesting factor, and I think it talks about market forces, is there are teenagers. When I was a teenager, as soon as I turned 16, I wanted a car. I wanted to drive on my own. I didn't have any other options. The bicycle would take me too long to get to where I wanted to go. Today, more and more adolescents in America are not getting their license at 16. They're waiting longer. And a lot of that has to do with the cell phones in their pockets. They're able to bring a vehicle to them when they need it, which is a great thing. And I think that will continue with more education and more understanding. That will bleed over into general society as well.
In Torino, we have a big problem with the bike free floating. So we find this bike everywhere in our city. So how can we stop this kind of behavior? First of all, we try to educate people from children from the school, so starting from the school, and push the right behavior inside our citizen. The second thing is the communication. For example, our major started 2 years ago a communication against the bad habit that the Italians have to park everywhere the car, so to leave the car in a corner. And we see now that this habit is decreasing. So good communication can be support the change of behavior of the citizen, even in Italy.
Guys, thank you all. I know it was short. Thank you very much for coming. One very quick, please.
It's going to be an advert. So London's just launched London Road Lab. Essentially, it's for startups or innovative companies, large or small, to apply. It went live yesterday, and the idea is, rather than just designing a proof of concept, which we'll also fund, we will look to buy the product at the end, which I know has been a challenge with the public sector in the past.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.